The Age of Faith also inspired wars of conquest. In 1093 CE, the Byzantine Emperor Alexius Comnenus sent a letter to Robert, Count of Flanders. The emperor asked for help against the Muslim Turks. They were threatening to conquer his capital, Constantinople. Pope Urban II also read that letter. He then issued a call for what he termed a holy war, a crusade, to gain control of the Holy Land. The term crusade comes from crux, or cross. Over the next 300 years, a number of such crusades were launched. The crusades had economic, social, and political goals as well as religious motives. Pope Urban wanted to help the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople because he hoped to reunite Christendom, which had split into eastern and western branches, with the Schism, or split, of 1054 CE. Muslims also controlled Palestine and closed Jerusalem to non-Muslims. The Pope wanted to reclaim these holy lands. In addition, kings and the church both saw the Crusades as an opportunity to get rid of quarrelsome knights who fought each other. These unruly knights threatened the peace of the kingdoms, as well as church property. Pope Urban's call brought a tremendous outpouring of religious feeling and support for the crusade. So why would anyone want to travel thousands of miles and risk getting killed? According to the Pope, those who died on a crusade were assured a place in heaven. So with red crosses sewn on tunics over their armor and the battle cry of God wills it on their lips, knights and commoners were fired by religious zeal and became crusaders. Some who participated in the crusades were younger sons who, unlike the eldest sons, did not stand to inherit their father's property. They were looking for land and a position in society, or for adventure. Serfs were eager to break their feudal bonds, or achieve salvation trying. In the later Crusades, merchants profited by making cash loans to finance the journey. They also leased their ships for a hefty fee to transport armies over the Mediterranean Sea. In addition, the merchants of Pisa, Genoa, and Venice hoped to win control of key trade routes to India, Southeast Asia, and China from Muslim traders. By early 1097 CE, 3 armies of knights and people of all classes had made the long journey and gathered outside Constantinople on their way to the Holy Land. Most of the Crusaders were French, but Bohemians, Germans, Englishmen, Scots, Italians, and Spaniards came as well. The Crusaders were ill prepared for war in this first crusade. Many knew nothing of the geography, climate, and culture of the Holy Land. The Crusaders had no grand strategy to capture Jerusalem. The nobles argued among themselves and couldn't agree on a leader. Finally, an army of 12,000, less than 1/4 of the original army, approached Jerusalem. The Crusaders besieged the city for over a month. Finally, on July 15, 1099, they captured the city and slaughtered the inhabitants. All in all, the Crusaders won a narrow strip of land. It stretched about 650 miles from Edessa in the north to Jerusalem in the south. 4 feudal Crusader states were carved out of this territory, each ruled by a European noble. The Crusader states were extremely vulnerable to Muslim counterattack, and in 1144, Edessa was reconquered by the Turks. The Second Crusade was organized to recapture the city, but its army straggled home in defeat. In 1187 CE, Europeans were shocked to learn that Jerusalem itself had fallen to a Kurdish warrior and Muslim leader named Saladin.
I am Salahuddin. Salahuddin.
He didn't slaughter the Christians, but allowed them to buy their own freedom or be sold into slavery. The Third Crusade to recapture Jerusalem was led by 3 of Europe's most powerful monarchs. They were Philip II of France, German Emperor Frederick I, and the English King Richard the Lionhearted.
And I am the King of England.
Philip argued with Richard and went home, while Barbarossa drowned on the journey to the Holy Lands. So Richard was left to lead the Crusaders in an attempt to regain the Holy Land from Saladin. Both Richard and Saladin were brilliant warriors. After many battles, the two agreed to a truce in 1192 CE. Jerusalem remained under Muslim control. In return, Saladin promised that unarmed Christian pilgrims could freely visit the city's holy places. In 1204 CE, the Fourth Crusade to capture Jerusalem failed. The knights did not reach the Holy Land. Instead, they ended up looting the city of Constantinople. In the 1200s, 4 more crusades to free the Holy Land were also unsuccessful. The religious spirit of the First Crusade faded, and the search for personal gain grew. In the 2 later Crusades, armies marched not to the Holy Land but to Egypt. The Crusaders intended to weaken Muslim forces there before going to the Holy Land, but none of these attempts conquered much land. The Children's Crusade took place in 1212 CE. In 2 different movements, thousands of children set out to conquer Jerusalem. An estimated 30,000 children under age 18 joined in. They were armed only with the belief that God would give them Jerusalem. On their march south to the Mediterranean, many died from cold and starvation. The rest drowned at sea or were sold into slavery. In Germany, About 20,000 children and young adults gathered and began marching toward Rome. Thousands died in the cold and the treacherous crossing of the Alps. Those who survived the trip to Italy finally did meet the Pope. He told them to go home and wait until they were older. About 2,000 survived the return trip to Germany. A few boarded a ship for the Holy Land and were never heard from again. In Spain, Muslims, called Moors, controlled most of the country until the 1100s. The Reconquista was a long effort by the Spanish to drive the Muslims out of Spain. By the late 1400s, the Muslims held only the tiny kingdom of Granada. In 1492, Granada finally fell to the Christian army of Ferdinand and Isabella, the Spanish monarchs. Oh yeah, they were the monarchs who financed Christopher Columbus's voyage. Anyway, to unify their country under Christianity and to increase their power, Isabella and Ferdinand made use of the Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
This was a court held by the church to suppress heresy. Heretics were people whose religious beliefs differed from the teachings of the church. Many Jews and Muslims in Spain converted to Christianity during the late 1400s to avoid the Spanish Inquisition.
The Spanish Inquisition.
Even so, the inquisitors suspected these Jewish and Muslim converts of heresy. A person suspected of heresy might be questioned for weeks and even tortured. Hey, that looks horrible. And that looks familiar. Anyway, once suspects confessed, they were often burned at the stake. In 1492 CE, the monarchs expelled all practicing Jews and Muslims from Spain. The Crusades are a forceful example of the power of the church during the medieval period. The call to go to the Holy Land encouraged thousands to leave their homes and travel to faraway lands. For those who stayed home, especially women, it meant a chance to manage affairs of the estates, or to operate shops and inns. European merchants who lived and traded in the Crusader states expanded trade between Europe and Southwest Asia. Crusaders were exposed to new ideas, advances in technology, new foods, and to exotic spices like nutmeg, cinnamon, and pepper. The goods imported from Southwest Asia included spices, fruits, and cloth. This trade with the West benefited both Christians and Muslims. However, the failure of later Crusades lessened the power of the Pope. The Crusades weakened the feudal nobility and increased the power of the kings. Thousands of knights and other participants lost their lives and fortunes. The sacking of Constantinople by Crusaders weakened the Byzantine Empire. For Muslims, the intolerance and prejudice displayed by Christians in the Holy Land left behind a legacy of bitterness and hatred. This legacy continues to the present. For Christians and Jews who remained in the Muslim-controlled region after the fall of the Crusader states, relations with the Muslim leadership worsened. For Jews in Europe, the Crusades were a time of increased persecution. The Crusades grew out of religious fervor, feudalism, and chivalry, which came together with explosive energy. The same energy led to the growth of trade, towns, and universities in medieval Europe.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.